Out. The night of the Hargrove Medical Gala, 32 of the most decorated cardiac surgeons in the country stood in silence around a machine that wouldn't work, and not one of them could fix it. It was supposed to be the crowning moment of Hargrove Memorial Hospital's centennial celebration. 400 guests, a ballroom in downtown Chicago dressed in white and gold. Out. And at the center of it all, the hospital's newest acquisition, a surgical simulation system that cost more than most people would earn in 3 lifetimes. The kind of machine that could train the next generation of heart surgeons using real-time haptic feedback and AI-guided correction. It had never been publicly demonstrated before. Tonight was meant to be its debut. Instead, it sat dark and unresponsive on the stage like a broken promise. Out. The hospital's chief of innovation, a man named Philip Crane, stood off to the side of the stage with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. He had the look of someone who had already begun calculating how to assign blame. He was good at that. Out. Nobody in the room knew that the man who had actually built the system's core calibration protocol, the man whose name was on the original technical documentation, was standing near the back of the ballroom in a rented suit that was slightly too wide in the shoulders, holding a glass of water he hadn't touched. His name was Dale Hutchins. He was 47 years old, a former biomedical engineer, and he had been fired from Hargrove Memorial 3 years ago. Out. He was only here tonight because his daughter, Penny, age 9, had spent 2 weeks decorating a handmade invitation for him after she overheard her babysitter talking about the event on the phone. Penny had a habit of doing things like that, filling in the empty spaces of her father's life with small, determined acts of love. She had drawn a stethoscope around the border of the card and written in green crayon, "Go be brave, Dad." Dale kept the card in his wallet. Out. He had not planned to stay past the appetizers. The trouble had started about 40 minutes into the evening. A Hargrove technician had powered up the simulation system for the scheduled demonstration, and nothing happened. A second technician was called over, then a third. Then, gradually, a small cluster of people gathered around the machine in the way people gather around anything that has publicly failed. Half curious, half relieved it wasn't their problem. Out. Except it was becoming everyone's problem very quickly. Philip Crane had pushed through the crowd with the energy of a man who believed his presence alone could solve technical difficulties. It couldn't. He stood there for 11 minutes looking at a screen that displayed nothing but a blinking error code, and then he quietly instructed his assistant to call every engineer and technician on Hargrove's payroll who could be reached on a Saturday night. Out. 32 specialists eventually made their way to that stage over the course of the next hour and a half. Some came from home, a few came directly from the hospital's cardiac unit. One flew in from a conference in Milwaukee after Crane personally called his cell phone. Not one of them could identify the fault. The error code was rare. Out. Not rare in the sense that it was exotic, rare in the sense that it only appeared when a very specific calibration sequence had been executed incorrectly during the initial system installation. It was a ghost in the machine, the kind of problem that didn't announce itself until everything else was already in motion. Out. And fixing it required knowing not just what the error meant but why the original calibration had been designed the way it was. The logic behind it, the sequence it was built around, the margin of error its creator had deliberately built in for exactly this kind of scenario. Dale knew all of that. He had written all of that. Out. He had spent 4 years designing the calibration architecture for this system before Crane had removed him from the project 18 months before its completion, citing creative differences and a need for fresh direction. The work Dale had already done, the documentation, the calibration protocol, the fail-safe procedures, had quietly remained in Hargrove's system under a different engineer's name. Out. That engineer was standing on stage right now looking at the error code with the expression of a man who had memorized someone else's handwriting but never understood what the words meant. His name was Scott Bellamy. He was 34, confident in almost every room he entered, and he had accepted credit for Dale's work with the ease of someone who had convinced himself over time that he deserved it. Dale watched from the back of the room. Out. He wasn't angry anymore. That part had burned itself out somewhere in the second year after his firing, late at night when Penny was asleep and he had nothing to do but sit with it. What he felt now was something quieter and harder to name. Recognition, maybe. The particular awareness of a man who sees his own work failing in someone else's hands. He set down his water glass. He almost let out. He stood there for a full 3 minutes deciding to leave, already picturing the drive home, the babysitter asleep on the couch, Penny curled up with her stuffed elephant in the dark. He could just go. No one here had even noticed he was present. Then a woman appeared at his elbow. Her name was Dr. Constance Aldridge. Out. She was the hospital's chief medical officer, the kind of person who seemed to move through rooms the way weather moved through open country, noticed everywhere, unsettling in the best possible way. She was 61 years old, silver-haired, and she had a reputation for being the only person at Hargrove Memorial who reliably told the truth in board meetings. She had also, 3 years ago, been the only member of Hargrove's executive leadership who had voted against Dale's termination. Out. "You've been standing in the same spot for 40 minutes, she said quietly. Not accusatory, just observational, the way a doctor notes a symptom. "I was about to leave," Dale said. "I know." She glanced toward the stage, then back at him. "Do you still understand that system?" He didn't answer right away. Out. On stage, Scott Bellamy was now on the phone with what appeared to be the system's manufacturer, speaking in the clipped, urgent tone of someone who had run out of ideas and was hoping someone else had one. "The calibration fault," Dale said, almost to himself. "It's the third stage initialization. If the installation team ran the startup sequence in the wrong environment temperature, the haptic feedback module goes into passive lock. Out. It won't respond to any input until the lock is manually cleared through the diagnostic partition." He paused. "It takes about 5 minutes to fix, maybe less." Constance Aldridge said nothing for a moment. "That information," she said, "is not in any of the documentation currently on record. I checked tonight. When Bellamy took over the project, your original files were archived under a restricted folder. They were never incorporated into the system manual." Dale looked at her. Out. "Philip doesn't know I know that," she said simply. "But I do." The silence between them lasted about 4 seconds. "My daughter made me a card," Dale said. "It came out unexpectedly, the way things did when emotion found the wrong exit. She told me to be brave." Constance Aldridge looked at him with the particular patience of someone who understood that people needed a moment before they could do difficult things. "She sounds like a wise kid," she said. Out. Dale straightened the jacket that was too wide in the shoulders. "Where's the access panel on that model?" he asked, though he already knew he had designed it. "Stage left," she said, "behind the secondary monitor array." He walked toward the stage. The walk from the back of the ballroom to the front was not a long one physically. Out. But there was something about crossing that distance. Moving through the white tablecloths and the candlelight and the quiet murmur of 400 people who had been told the demonstration would be slightly delayed, that felt like moving through a different kind of space. Every step was deliberate. His rented shoes were slightly too tight, and he was aware of them in a way he hadn't been all evening. A security guard near the stage steps held up one hand. Out. "Sir, this area is restricted to authorized personnel." Dale stopped. He was very aware of how he looked, middle-aged man in an ill-fitting suit, no badge, no credential visible, no obvious reason to be standing at the foot of those steps. "I can fix the machine," he said. The security guard looked at him with professional skepticism. "Sir, I need you to return to, who is this?" Philip Crane's voice carried from the stage. Out. He had spotted Dale from the platform and was now walking toward the edge of it, frowning with the focused displeasure of a man whose evening had already been ruined once and was not interested in it being ruined twice. Crane looked down from the stage. There was a pause that lasted exactly long enough for recognition to arrange itself on his face. "Dale Hutchins." He said it the way you say the name of something you thought you'd already dealt with. "Mr. Crane," Dale said. Out. A small crowd had gathered nearby, not conspicuously, but the way people gathered when they sensed something unscheduled was happening. Scott Bellamy had moved to the edge of the stage as well, still holding his phone, his earlier confidence now replaced with something more cautious. "This is a private event," Crane said. "How did you?" "He's my guest." Constance Aldridge had appeared beside Dale with the quiet inevitability of someone who had been moving toward this moment for a long time. Out. She addressed Crane directly, her voice carrying without effort, "And he says he can fix the system." Crane's expression shifted through several registers in quick succession. Surprise, calculation, a particular brand of corporate composure that Dale recognized, the kind that was mostly about controlling what other people could read from your face. "That's not," Crane began. "We have 400 guests," Constance said. "We have a board chairman in the third row." Out. "We have a journalist from the Tribune who was invited to cover the demonstration, and she has been checking her phone for the last 45 minutes. A brief pause. "Let him try." The silence that followed was the kind that fills a room without quite being audible. Crane looked at Dale. Then he looked at Bellamy. Bellamy gave the smallest possible shrug, the shrug of a man who had run out of other options and would deal with the implications later. "Fine," Crane said. Out. The word came out like something he'd bitten through. Dale went to work. He moved to the access panel behind the secondary monitor array without hesitation, because he knew where it was. He had spent 6 months deciding where it should be, placing it in a position that would allow single-person access without requiring the system to be powered down. He had thought about that. He had thought about everything. The diagnostic partition was exactly where he'd left it. Out. The haptic module lock was exactly the fault he'd expected. Third-stage initialization, triggered by an ambient temperature drop during installation. Whoever had set up the system had run the calibration sequence in the loading dock, where the temperature in February would have been low enough to trigger the passive lock threshold. It was a simple mistake. It was also a mistake that was documented in detail in Dale's original technical files, the ones that had been archived and never transferred to the active manual. He cleared the lock, he ran the restart sequence, he stepped back. The screen on the simulation system came to life with a soft chime. The haptic feedback array completed its initialization cycle. The interface populated smoothly, all functions operational, all indicators green. From power on to full operational status, 4 minutes and 53 seconds. The room didn't erupt, it wasn't that kind of moment. But there was a shift, the way the air in a room changes when something collective has been released. People began to move again, speak again. Someone near the front began to applaud, a tentative sound that caught and spread. Dale stood beside the machine he had built and watched it work. He was not aware of how he looked in that moment. He was not performing anything. He was simply a man looking at something he had made, watching it do what it was always supposed to do, and feeling the particular, understated satisfaction of that. Philip Crane had come down from the stage. He was standing nearby with an expression that had been carefully arranged into something neutral, but Dale had known people like Crane long enough to know what the neutrality was covering. Scott Bellamy was nowhere to be seen. Constance Aldridge stood a few feet away. She was watching Crane. "Philip," she said, and her voice had changed, not louder but different in quality. More deliberate. "I'd like you to come to my office on Monday morning. I have some documentation I'd like you to review." Crane looked at her. "Documentation," he repeated. "The original project files," she said. "The ones filed under restricted access in 2021. The ones that show in considerable detail the authorship of this system's calibration architecture." She let that settle. All of it. The blood left Crane's face in the slow, controlled way of someone who understood exactly what was being said and was deciding in real time how to respond. He was good at deciding in real time. It was one of the things that had made him effective for so long. But he was looking at Constance Aldridge, and she was not a woman who could be managed. "Monday," he said. "Monday," she confirmed. He walked away. Not fast, he was too practiced for that, but he walked away and he did not look back. Dale was still standing near the simulation system when Dr. Aldridge came to stand beside him. Around them, the gala was resuming, waitstaff moving, guests settling, the quiet hum of an event getting back to itself. "How long have you had the documentation?" Dale asked. "Long enough," she said. "I've been waiting for the right moment. Or the right reason." She glanced at him. "I needed to know you still wanted it." Dale thought about that. He thought about the 3 years since his firing, the months of legal consultations and carefully worded rejection letters, the freelance work he'd cobbled together to keep the mortgage current. The night he'd explained to Penny in the simplest terms he could manage why Daddy wasn't going to his old job anymore. She had listened very seriously and then said, "That's not fair," in the way that children say things that are completely true. He thought about the card she'd made him. The green crayon stethoscope. "Go be brave, Dad." "I never stopped wanting it," he said. "I just stopped thinking I could have it." Constance nodded slowly. "Well," she said, "that's what Monday is for." The weeks that followed were not cinematic. They did not resolve themselves in a single meeting or a single document. They were made of phone calls and attorneys and a formal review process that took time and required patience and proceeded with the particular pace of institutional accountability, which is rarely fast and never satisfying in the way stories usually make it seem. But it proceeded. The restricted files were formally unsealed. An independent technical review confirmed that the calibration architecture, every structural element of it, had been authored by Dale Hutchins between 2017 and 2021. The documentation trail was clear. It had always been clear. It had simply been buried under a name that didn't belong to it. Philip Crane resigned before the review was completed. The hospital's board accepted his resignation in a closed session and issued a statement that said very little but implied considerably more. Scott Bellamy was placed on administrative leave pending a full audit of all project contributions attributed to him during his tenure. Legal proceedings regarding intellectual property were initiated. They would take longer and they would cost more than anything else about this story, but they had begun. And Dale Hutchins was offered a position. Not his old position. That was gone, restructured out of existence during the years he'd been away. What Constance Aldridge offered him was something new. A role created specifically for the development of next-generation surgical simulation systems, with full attribution for all prior contributions, a salary that reflected what his work had actually been worth, and a contract that had been reviewed by 3 separate attorneys before he signed it. He took 2 days to decide, not because he was uncertain but because he wanted to do it carefully. He had learned something about doing things carefully. On the evening of the second day, he made dinner, spaghetti, Penny's favorite, with the kind of sauce that came from a jar because neither of them pretended to be food people, and he sat down at the kitchen table with his daughter and told her what had happened. Penny listened with the serious, complete attention that she gave to things that mattered to her. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Out. "So you fixed the machine," she said. "I did, and now they want you back?" Something like that. She considered this with the gravity of a 9-year-old who took fairness seriously. "Good," she said finally, "because you're the one who made it." Dale looked at his daughter across the kitchen table, at her spaghetti-stained chin and her absolute certainty and the matter-of-fact way she moved through a world she believed, fundamentally, should make sense. "Yeah," he said. "Out. I am." He thought about something Constance Aldridge had said to him in the days after the gala, during one of the quieter moments of the review process. They had been standing in a hospital corridor waiting for a meeting to start, and she had said something that he kept returning to. She had said, "The work doesn't disappear just because someone else put their name on it. It's still there, it still functions. It still does what it was built to do." Out. The truth about who made it doesn't go away, it just waits. He had written that down when he got home, not because he planned to do anything with it, just because it was true, and he wanted to have it somewhere he could find it. Out. On his first day back at Hargrove Memorial, 6 weeks after the gala, on a Tuesday morning in early spring when the air outside smelled faintly like mud and green things just starting, Dale Hutchins walked the hospital's main entrance and took the elevator to the 6th floor, where his new office was. The nameplate on the door was temporary, the kind printed on paper and slid into a plastic frame, because the engraved version was still on order. It said his name. Out. He stood in front of it for a moment. Then he went inside, set his bag down, and started work. In his wallet, between his ID and a folded receipt, was a card decorated with a crayon stethoscope and the words, "Go be brave, Dad," written in green. He didn't need it today. But he kept it anyway, because some things you keep not because you need them but because they remind you of who you were when you needed them most, and who was counting on you to be more than that.